G'day everyone, it's me, the anti-theocrat, back with another one. We're looking at George Orwell. Apparently he is evil incarnate. So, shall we take a look at this person, whatever it is? Ben Norton. Ben Norton says he's a journalist, writer and filmmaker, but I don't think he's actually done anything of any high regard that anyone would consider. I think those are self-proclamations for an absolute wanker. Now, it could just be that he's a propagandist or a filthy liar, but either way, I'm going to read this and we will take it for what it is, shall we? I'm going to try and give this a fair assessment. Try. George Orwell was a reactionary snitch who made a blacklist of leftists for the British government. A reactionary snitch. We'll keep that in mind, shall we? He was a reactionary snitch who made a blacklist of leftists. What you mean is essentially communists, but we'll get to that because there are other people on that list and you're going to make a big issue of that, aren't you? It is fascinating seeing people in the 21st century, especially self-declared leftists, still lionising George Orwell, the worst kind of reactionary turncoat. Really? A reactionary turncoat now? You're really good with the fucking personal slurs, aren't you? This is really poisoning the well hard. Now, I did some of that myself at the top, but I have read bits of this article, a fair chunk of this article already, and I knew what you were. But boy, have you really just gone to some effort to poison this well. For years, and you call yourself a journalist, for fuck's sake. For years, the cat has been out of the bag. George Orwell secretly worked for the UK Foreign Office. At the end of his life, he was an outright counter-revolutionary. I'm going to... George Orwell worked for the UK's Foreign Office. I'm going to bring that back and later too. At the end of his life, he was an outright counter-revolutionary snitch. A counter-revolutionary snitch. You can't be a counter-revolutionary snitch if you were not a revolutionary. Right? A snitch is someone in your own ranks snitching on you. Orwell pretty much made a life of being anti-totalitarian, spying on leftists on behalf of the imperialist British government. Imperialist British government. We're talking about pre- and post-war Britain here. Pretty much the empire's already gone. Imperialist Britain? Really? There's just so many fucking... Oh, God. I don't even know how to explain what this is. This is just poisoning everything. This guy poisons everything he touches. At this point, he's explaining George Orwell and the UK, and all he's done is poison them. The UK government also found Orwell's work quite useful. Oh, did they now? The coup-plotting death squad-trained assassins and torturers of the Central Intelligence Agency turned Orwell's book into a propaganda weapon. They probably did, but again with this, the coup-plotting death squad training assassins and torturers. Fucking hell. You'd think they never did anything else. I know they weren't the sweetest, most loving people on the planet, but it wasn't a sweet, loving game they were playing either. But for fuck's sake... This before you tell us who you're talking about. And do you have any idea what poison in the well is? You've pointed us at every fucking well you've passed by. The CIA even founded the Animal Farm movie, which is now mandatory viewing in many high schools. Is it viewing the movie? I'd make them read the book. You want the full depth of it, read the book. In any case, I don't care. I don't care. You know, we make kids watch a shitload of things. I had to read stuff like Little Fucking Women. Tedious fucking crap. But what happened after Orwell's death in 1950? What is more scandalous is that he knowingly collaborated with the UK government when he was still alive. Oh no, he was a citizen of the UK and he collaborated with his government. That's fucking terrible, isn't it? Against his own nation's interests? Is that what you're saying? Because I remember you back here saying he was a reactionary turncoat, so he must have been working against his own nation's interests. Is that what you're saying? I don't think so. Orwell's list is a term that should be, I love the fucking inverted commas around that, is a term that should be known by anyone who claimed to be a person of the left. Yeah, it should. Yes. We should know who Orwell considered to be, well, not perfectly adept at representing their state. It was a blacklist, and I'll come to that. It was a blacklist Orwell complied for the British government's Information Research Department, an anti-communist propaganda unit set up for the Cold War. I don't have a problem with that, and I'm glad you finally named the enemy, anti-communist propaganda. And by the way, the propaganda game was a game that both sides were playing, so don't fucking get up about, Orwell and the British government, huh? The list includes dozens of suspected communists, crypto-communists, socialists, and fellow travellers, and even LGBT people and Jews. Well, yeah, probably with a vested interest in socialism. So, this is really unimportant, isn't it? Because what he's talking about is what he calls crypto-communists and fellow travellers. I actually have some idea what he means by fellow travellers, but it's not important. These people are represented by these terms. And I don't think he's naming them because they are LGBT or Jews. Their names scribbled alongside the sacrosanct 1984 authors. Sacrosanct. Ooh. Disparaging comments about the personal predilections of those blacklisted. Well, yeah, if these people were, throwing orgies or whatever, and he wouldn't have been talking about LGBT, he would have been talking about this, right? These are the people that the world focused on, the gay men. They don't get to fucking call it LBGT. No one gave a fuck about the twat guzzlers. Nobody fucking gave a damn. And as for the BT, nobody even thought of them. Maybe the T's, but they would have considered them to be G's. Anyway, comments about personal privilege, yeah, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. He didn't think much of these people's lifestyles, and he was willing to say so. Good for him. The document was declassified by the British government in 2003. The leading neoliberal newspaper, I would call them the virtue signalers, The Guardian, reported at the time that the blacklist contains a list of 38 public figures. That's not very many, 38. This massive, great list declaring all the horrible 38 people. From the actors Charlie Chaplin and Michael Redgrave to the author B.J. Priestley, whom Orwell suggested should not be trusted by the IRD as anti-communist propagandists. Alright, so this list doesn't actually spell out a list of actual communists. That's what you've said here. It says that due to their sympathies, the leanings of them politically, they should not be used as anti-communist propagandists. This means if you're doing radio broadcasts aimed at Russia about the evils of Russians, the Communist Party, don't use these people. This paragraph, that's what you said. Right, you just undone all this other bullshit you wrote about this list by saying that this list was about people who should not be used as anti-communist propagandists. Now, I know very little about this list. I don't really give a flying fuck. Maybe it is something I should know about. I don't think I would, on the basis of anything you've written here, think less of Orwell for having written such a list. In any case, Timothy Garton Ash, the historian who obtained the document, revealed that Orwell gave the blacklist to a close friend, Celia Kerwin, who worked for the Foreign Office Information Research Department, from his sickbed in May 1949. Remembering the man died in 1950, he had this blacklist close at hand, held it close to his heart, wherever in the fuck he held it. He had this list, and he handed it over on his deathbed in 1949. This does not suggest, as you have said back here, that he, that he secretly worked for the UK's Foreign Office. That's not what that says. It just says he compiled a document he handed over to them. There is a fair chance that George Orwell did work for the Foreign Office, or he worked for people doing anti-communist propaganda, or he just did his fucking radio shows which were anti-totalitarianism. But this undoes the rest of this fucking story, because he handed over this document on his deathbed. It was not a document created hand in hand over years working for the Foreign Office. You even suggest that he gave it to a close friend. Now, had he been working with them, he could have given this to his close friend at any time. Fucking hell. How to undermine your own fucking writing. Orwell told Kerwin in April that the list included journalists and writers who, in my opinion, are crypto-communists. Yeah, fair enough. Fellow travellers or inclined, right? So what he's saying to these people are crypto-communists, or they travel in the same circles, or inclined that way and should not be trusted as propagandists. Right. Again, all you're saying is these people should not be trusted to be the face of an anti-communist program, any anti-communist program, because their sympathies lean in that direction. Fucking hell, you turned this turns out to be an absolute nothing, and you turned it into a great big fucking long article about how evil the man was. He was anti-totalitarian. The communists were totalitarians. We'll keep going. I'm going to give up eventually. This is coming to an end. There's a point where it just sort of dwindles into fucking shit flinging. This guy's a monkey. There seems to be general agreement by Orwell fans left and right to skate gently over Orwell's suspicions of Jews, homosexuals and blacks. I suspect he may have had some reasons to suspect those particular people. If you read this section here, he is discussing crypto-communists and follow travellers are inclined that way and shouldn't be trusted as propagandists. I'm guessing that these people that he was talking of may have fallen into these ranks. Unless you have proof that he was anti-Jew, anti-homosexual, and anti-black, and even if you did, it probably fits with the times. We are talking about a man who died in 1950, which means his life experience is somewhat earlier, in a time when most people found issue with the Jews, and homosexuality had changed from something acceptable in the 1920s, early 30s, to something that was seen as less than desirable. And as to black people, they represent, in Britain at this time, during his lifetime, they essentially represent different ethnicity within your own ranks. And yet I'm still betting the ones he named fitted into this description: crypto-communists or fellow travellers. But you've given me no reason to think anything else. Okay. Anyway, the person who wrote this was a legendary radical journalist, Alexander Cockburn. A radical journalist wrote that assessment. So cool, paint me fucking surprised. This guy probably would have been on the list had he fucking had Orwell known of him. You get it? The people who were on the list probably didn't like the list. They found excuses for not liking the list. Sardonically referring to the anti-communist blacklist as St. George's list. Who gives a fuck? If any other post-war intellectual was suddenly found to have written many diatribes about blacks, homosexual and Jews, I'm sure many did, we can safely assume that subsequent commentary would not have been forgiving, he added. Here, there's barely a word. Fuck off. Just fuck off. This is trying to historically rewrite the evils of the man through cherry picking from a list which he handed over on his deathbed to a friend who happened to work in the bloody secret services or whatever the fuck. Cockburn, or just call him Wanker Chops. We'll call him Communist Wanker Chops, because I bet this guy was well and truly someone who was going to be on that list. The Nation article on the subject, George's list, is difficult to find today. You went looking though, didn't you? I have republished it in full below. The article also expanded into The Fable of the Weasel, Cockburn's foreword for John Reed's Animal Farm parody Snowball's Chance. None of that means anything. That's a waste of fucking words, that was. All you're doing is explaining how much of an activist this guy would have been out there marching with BLM screaming socialism for the win, wouldn't he? That's all you've explained. Apologists insist Orwell simply sold out later in life and became a cranky conservative. Yet the story is more complex. I agree. I'm not actually going to read the rest of that paragraph because I think he was always anti-totalitarian. Fucking hell. Look, I'm going to have to read it. Orwell had the consistent political thread throughout his life. Did he grow up as a kid with this? This explains how he could go from fighting alongside a Spanish Trotskyite militia in the multi-tendency war against fascism. Yeah, because he wasn't fighting with the Trotskyites. He was fighting against fascism. And maybe it's fighting alongside the Russians, the Soviets, that gave him some of his insight against fascism, to demonising the Soviet Union as the real enemy. Well, yeah, he fought alongside these people. He might have had some insight before returning home to Imperial Britain. Imperial Britain again. Fucking Imperial Britain. Right. You understand that the Soviet... Oh, we'll get to this, okay? We'll get to this. Imperial Britain. Everything's fucking Imperial Britain. Where he became a social democratic traitor. Really? Maybe he was never a fucking Trotskyite. Maybe that's your fucking assessment of the situation. He fought alongside, you said. Because a number of people fought alongside So yes, I don't know we can call him a traitor because he stood by his own nation. He stood by his nation's interests. The traitor here is possibly you. Think on that, because you're discussing another nation's interests as being superior to Imperial Britain. And maybe you're a Yank, so you're just a wanker anyway, but hey, American fans out there, don't worry. Not all. Who castigated capitalism while collaborating with the capitalist state. I've got a heater on here, it's starting to get at my sinuses, so excuse me if I start to ramble, sound off, or have trouble getting words out. Although, fucked up reading's normal, isn't it? I should just stand by it. Against revolutionaries trying to create socialism. Yeah, and he was anti-totalitarianism. Sure, the USSR did some objectable things. Really? Objectable things. Objectable, not objectionable. Yeah, no, I guess they're... fuck it. Jesus. Alright, nose. But it was also the only large country in the entire world that supported the Spanish Republicans in their fight against fascism. Excluding a bit of extra support from Mexico. Do you call in Mexico a large country? What? Fucking hell. The Soviet Union understood that imperialism comes through supporting your neighbours until you can take over with your political system. Oh shit, that's not what that says. Yeah, but it's what it fucking means. The Soviet Union supported the Spanish Republicans because they saw a foothold. They were not popular. Spain represented a foothold for the Soviet Union to expand communism into Central Europe. Understood that one cannot have a revolution if one cannot even defeat the fascist counter-revolution first. Well, why do we need revolutions? And why the fuck do we need counter-revolutions? I'm sick of this fucking bloodshed shit. A lesson many on the left still have not learned today. So you're preaching for revolution, are you? You're preaching for punch the fascists? Is that what you're after? We name anyone a fascist? We do the communist thing of just naming the enemy and then deciding that because the enemy has been named, we've got to fucking kill him. That's the communist way. Yet leftists like Orwell and his devoted followers continue to lament Constrad and revel in their ideological purity. Fuck off. While conveniently living relatively comfortable lives in Western imperialist. Everything you don't fucking like is imperialist, isn't it? Fucking hell. While conveniently living relatively... this imperialist thing shits me, and I was going to talk about it before. It shits me because what the fuck do you think the Russians did at the end of World War II? Right? The Western powers, they went into Europe to free the countries that existed there and hand them back their nationhood. The Russians on the other side built a fucking empire. They took over the countries that they went through. They gave them their own puppet governments and they fucking took them over, creating an empire. A Russian empire. Fucking hell. But everything you don't like is an imperialist country. Fucking hell. That commit much more heinous crimes throughout the world every day. They do? Which heinous crimes? Because you fucking said it, name them. Name them, you cunt. Because nobody quite knows exactly how many Chinese people died, but it is significantly high numbers. Died just so Mao could regain the country's support. That's right. Just so that that Mao could have his name in it, his picture in everyone's fucking house, and it is. Up until fairly recently, every fucking house had a picture of Mao and his generals. My father-in-law's has a stylized photo of the generals of the revolution all on horseback riding in out of the distance into the house with Mao at the lead. And then there's a picture of Mao on the other side of the wall. And the only other thing on that wall is a fucking a memorial to my wife's grandmother. Otherwise, it's just communist crap. There's Mao's poetry on the walls of public buildings in this village. Much aged and dying now, but they're there. I'd actually love to record some of this history one day, and next time I'm there I'll probably go and take photos around the place, because there is some really interesting stuff in this little village. But tens, hundreds, maybe millions of people died just because of the personality cult of Mao to retain power he was losing in the party. Now he's a god. The Chinese consider Mao to be the father of modern China. They can't kill more people than any fucking Western civilization in a single hit. Anyway, and you'll note that I didn't mention the fuck-ups with farming, or the youth who were moved around China to serve as basically slave labour until they were died, they were raped, they had no choice but to stay where they were because their lives had been totally fucked over, they had nothing to go home for, their families were dead or whatever, their properties didn't exist anymore. Right? There are so many other things I could have talked about, and I talked about just the personality cult of Mao, which was an uprising of Maoists who basically went hunting for anyone who didn't get down on their fucking knee when you said Chairman Mao. The BLM movement of China. Except they actually killed people. If you can name one similar Western imperialist country event, go for your fucking life. Heinous crimes, my ass. Mao committed that against his own people, as he committed every other fucking deadly policy against his own people. The same as the Russians did, by the way. Orwell spent World War II writing about how evil the Nazi-destroying USSR was. Did he? Did he write about how evil the Nazi-destroying USSR was, or did he just write how evil the USSR was? And remembering here that the USSR had essentially existed for 2 decades prior to the uprising of Nazi Germany. So we had plenty of things to go on there as far as what totalitarians do and how they behave. Lenin was not a sweet and gentle man, and neither were any of the people who followed him. George Orwell's infantile, I loved that. Poison in the well again. Politics are even more evident in the Maximus Opus 1984. And one of the most important reviews of this book was not a political scholar, or a philosopher, but rather a science fiction master, Isaac Asimov. Now, I'm going to put forward here that I'm a fan of Asimov. I think Asimov's writings were very good. I think Asimov was very much not a communist, and things like the 3 laws of robotics that we can give only to Asimov for having created were genius pieces of writing. So I like Asimov. But if Asimov did review Orwell's book, he didn't do it as a political scholar, right? So I'm going to skip over this. Oh, actually, I'm not. I'm going to read this first paragraph because it's pretty damning of Asimov, even though I respect him as a writer. But yeah, it's not damning of George Orwell. In his review of 1984, Asimov rips the novel to shreds. Go for your life. I haven't read such a thing, and I don't know that it exists, but there's a link, so maybe it did. All links for all my documents are down below. I will leave this. You can look it up. He also points out a shocking fact that conveniently shaped the myriad of disciplines of the British author George Orwell spent the peak of his years of genocidal destruction of World War II writing a childish history about how evil the Nazi-killing Soviet Union supposedly was. Again, you've put that into the fucking... I would... Maybe one day I'll have to read this bloody review of Asimov, because if he said these things, he was dimmer than he seemed in his writing. Fucking dipshit. For a start, the genocidal destruction through World War II of the Nazis had been preceded by the near genocidal destruction, certain ideologically destruction, the ideological destruction of the Russian people, by bringing death, poverty and destruction to the Russians. The Soviet Union quelled every possible attempt to overthrow them. And then through World War II, they had possibly the worst leader the nation could have had. Stalin. Stalin was a fucking killer. I don't know what happened to Stalin. Maybe he was always nuts, but certainly through the war years, he went fucking crazy. The man was an outright fucking killer. Had no problem putting people to death in the way the royals of, 1,000 years ago would just put someone to death for not being the right shade of supporting me the way I want. Don't fucking come high and mighty about the Soviet Union, because, the Nazis came along after the Soviet Union and started invading countries and killing people. The Soviet Union already had its own record. And if Asimov didn't know that, if Asimov didn't understand that, then he had no right to review 1984 in the way that you say he did. And I will not take that on for granted. And at the same time, I don't have the time in this video to go and look at his review that you have posted here, which is probably newworker.org. So it might just be an assessment of Asimov's writing too. It may not be the original document, and I'm not going there to fucking look it up. Okay, now there is a quote supposedly from Asimov, although no quotation mark on the way out, only one on the way in. So where does the quote finish? Interesting. Orwell wrote this childish novel, now basically meant it's a fucking childish novel. You ever read the thing, you dick? He put it in very See, you think it's childish because of the characters, the characterization. You just don't understand, do you? You don't understand the symbology. Now, basically, mandatory reading in US high schools. Yeah, so's a lot of other shit. In 1934 and 44, at the height of the Nazi Holocaust. Yes, but the Russians had already had Holocausts. Don't you fucking understand this? The Russians had already made clear that this was their way of doing things. The fact that there was a bloody revolution and then you kill everybody. you want out of the way, right? You didn't have to kill the royal family, but you don't want them coming back on the scene and trying to take control of the nation. So you have to slaughter every fucking single one of them you can find. That destroys that grip on power. You then destroy the churches. You destroy church leaders, killing many of them, because that's how you gain control over the minds of the people. The Russians, the Soviets had already made it clear their policy was to wipe the slate clean. That is to say, while the genocidal Nazi regime was mowing down the Red Army soldiers with warplanes, tanks and machine guns, while SS officers were shoving Jews, Romani and disabled people in ovens and gas chambers, I'd actually credos for that. A lot of people don't mention the Romani, but they were almost wiped off. The European Romani were almost wiped off the planet by Hitler and his mob. The Jews faced no such level of massacre by percentage. So yeah, all right. George Orwell was occupying his time writing a story about barn animals. You just don't understand the symbology. Really, what sort of fucking filmmaker are you? You never use symbology for anything anywhere. And how Stalin was a big, mean pig. Yeah, how fucking Stalin was. You think Stalin was a fucking beauty queen out there telling everybody that the world needs to live in peace? Fuck you, you damn idiot. The Battle of Stalingrad, one of the largest battles in human history, ended in 1943. And the year Orwell began work on Animal Farm. And in this battle alone, 500,000 Soviet soldiers sacrificed their lives to defeat fascism. And do we understand that fascism grew out of socialism? That it is, in fact, a socialist ideology itself? It adds the idea of class and personal gain to what is essentially a communist government. It's why China today is a fascist state, not a communist state. It has a communist state overseen, what would you call it, imperialist society? Fucking a capitalist society, okay? There are classes in China. There are significant classes of people in China. Everybody is not on a level footing as the communists would have it. It is not a communist country. In any case, the entire war, more than 26 million Soviets died. Cannon fodder is what we call that, cannon fodder. Compared to just around 400,000 Brits and 400,000 Americans. Right. So Stalin had cannon fodder, and the Brits and the Americans had lives that were of value. This is what you're telling me. This is what you're putting up here. You're going to say the Soviets, and you're going to put this in the words of a great man, but you're telling me that Stalin was a great and caring man, allowing 26 million people to be used as cannon fodder. Even virulent right-wing columnist and racist, sorry. I guess he was a columnist too. Colonialist and racist. Fucking hell, you're a moron. I'm going to link a video below. I want everybody who reaches this point in my video to watch it. Right? It is a more accurate presentation of what Winston Churchill did and said, and how these people came to these stupid ideas about him. Right? So, down below, I will put it at the top of my comments. Please watch that video. because this guy's a fucking moron if he thinks this is the case. An irreverent anti-communist. Yeah, because no one likes fucking totalitarians, right? I had to admit the undeniable fact that is the Russian armies who done. It doesn't matter, okay? It doesn't fucking matter. You're trying to make out that the Russians were grandiose people on a heroic scale because Stalin threw people ill-equipped into a battle where 26 million lives were not sufficiently valued. That's what you're telling me. That's what you've written here. It doesn't matter what Winston Churchill was or what he wrote. The Russians did put a thorn in the side of the Germans. They did create an empire. They were imperialists. And they did not value human life. But if you were to read Orwell, you would think the Soviets were the real evil ones. Yeah, 26 million Soviets died, compared to 400,000 Brits and 400,000 Americans. You don't think that stinks of a lack of care somewhere? That there's some evil in that? As Asimov observed in his review in 1984, oh, for fuck's sake. Orwell didn't want readers to mistake the villains for Nazis. The picture is of Stalinism and Stalinism only. Yes, this is actually a very wise assessment by Asimov. And in quotations, I can take this to be a quote of something that Asimov actually said. And this is right. Because for 20 years prior to the rise of the Nazis thereabouts, the Soviet Union had made it clear that it was going to kill anybody that stood in its way. An ideological rather than a race or religion-based cult of death. In fact, Orwell did nothing at all. Had nothing at all to say about the enormous Soviet sacrifice in World War II. No, because like me, he probably saw it as part of the evil of Stalin. That so many people were allowed to die on battlefields, when clearly to take the other side of Europe, it took far less. And they weren't less bloody battles or whatever. The Brits and Americans supplied their soldiers reasonably well and sent them out with the stuff to survive. The Soviets were lucky. Some of the people fighting for the Soviets were lucky if they were sent out with a fucking pitchfork. And they were men and women. They were badly clothed. Fucking, we look at the tanks and things that the Soviets could put on the field, but compared to what they had in the infantry, it was a disgusting waste of life. Yes, there's an evil in the way the Soviets allowed 26 million of their people to die. In the same way, the cult of Mao allowed people to go around slaughtering people for simply not bending the knee. I'm getting out. I'm leaving this. I'm not going to discuss any more of this fucking document because it's giving me the fucking shits. This is pure historical rewriting and misunderstanding of the situation. It is also a poisoning of the well at every fucking turn. Ben Norton, you are a fucking wanker. A dickhead and a moron. And yes, that's just fucking pure insult. It's fucking true. I hate having read this. I hate having fucking read this. Okay, that's me, the anti-theocrat. I'm done. I'm getting out. May your gods remain fictional, and I will see you in the next one.